Hello and welcome back to Book Lust. I'm Nancy Pearl. My guest today at Folio in downtown Seattle is author, illustrator, editor, multi-talented Emily Nemens. Emily, thank you for changing your schedule around and getting to Seattle from San Francisco a little early to be on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, yeah.
So your first novel just came out recently, The Cactus League. Will you talk a little bit about, tell us what it's about and how you describe it?
Sure, it's a novel set in spring training baseball. Major League Baseball has two camps, the Cactus League in Arizona and the Grapefruit League in Florida. And the Cactus League is this moment every spring when a whole group of people come together, athletes, coaches, fans, support staff,
hangers on,
everyone. About 1 million people show up in Phoenix every spring to watch practice games. And I've been going to spring training for years and years, and I love it. And I was so interested in this phenomenon of spring training, both as a celebration, but as kind of a chaotic and exciting moment in the year. And so I wrote a novel about it. I made up a team, the Los Angeles Lions, and I made up a superstar, Jason Goodyear. He plays left field, and he's having a really bad spring. And the book is about his struggles, but also his whole community and how they come together and get in the way and all react to this crisis.
What I loved about the book, and I think I emailed you or sent you a message right after I read it months ago to say how much I loved the book. What I loved most about the book was that it's such a character-driven novel, which is what I read and what I adore. But what I loved was that you have 9 separate stories, if you will, and you meet someone, say a coach, and then 5 stories later they turn up again. Right. And I just that's the kind of thing that I really look forward to in finding in a novel.
Yeah, I started by writing about a lot of different people and a lot of different characters that make up the ecosystem of spring training. So I did have a coach, and I had a couple hangers-on, and I had, of course, some athletes, and an owner of the team and a concession worker, and they were all just sort of at the stadium at the same place at the same time and weren't talking to one another. And I thought, better than even talk, they should walk into one another's stories, they should bump up against each other, they should confront each other, they should hit each other's cars.
Yeah, right.
They should
live at each other's houses.
And, not be heavy-handed about it, but think about coincidence and think about overlaps. And that didn't come naturally, that didn't come in the first write, but I had these characters I loved, and I knew so well that I could imagine how they'd interact with one another. So spring training, for people who aren't big baseball fans, the Major League team has 25 men on it. And usually at spring training, somewhere between 60 and 100 people show up and are trying to make that team. And every Thursday, they cut more and more players and send them on to minor league camps or just send them home entirely. And so at one point, I had named characters for 40 of those 80 athletes, and then I had almost all of, except for the single guys, would either have a wife or a girlfriend, and the whole front office and the whole coaching staff, and then a lot more people in the community as well. And it was just too many names.
Right.
It got in the way of reading.
Yes.
At one point I thought, should I have like a roster in the front of the book? But I ended up just sort of diminishing or playing down some of those secondary and tertiary characters.
Mm-hmm. What are some other baseball books that you, as soon as I asked that question, I was thinking, well, your book is not, it's a baseball book, but it's not a baseball book.
Right. Well, Gish Jen has a baseball book out this spring, so there must be something in the water. Hers is a dystopian look at sort of a near future very bad version of America, and this young woman comes in with an arm of gold, and I found that book really interesting and exciting. I was able to read it several months ago, but it's this very strange and different place. I was really interested in grounding my book in realism and thinking about American culture now and what baseball says about American culture or can say about it. I think my favorite is probably Pafko at the Wall, Don DeLillo's novella about this shot heard around the world. I really loved The Brothers Kay.
I did too.
By David James Duncan. Robert Coover's really weird fantasy before there was fantasy baseball, Universal Association of Baseball.
By J. Wall
I forget his name, but long title.
Long title, right. Oh, and then The Art of Fielding.
I did read that and liked it, and that came out right around when I started this book because I've been working on it since 2011. And I think for me, I was, I've been a lifelong baseball fan and interested in sports literature, and to see Chad's book come out and sort of reignite for many readers and baseball fans the space of literary fiction about sports was really exciting. It's sort of faded as a part of the fabric of literary fiction, but I don't think it should. I think it's the same way that celebrity says something about contemporary culture, that visual arts and music say something about the way we live now. I think sports do as well.
I've always wondered why there aren't great football novels.
I really liked the Throwback Special.
Did you read that? I loved the Throwback Special.
And
yes, and that's like your book in a way.
So this is by Chris Batchelder, and it came out several years ago, but I was already pretty far into my book. That one was, of course, about a bunch of retired football players, and I have a lot of themes about aging and hanging on to the hope to the past of one's primacy in baseball or just in life, and I think Chris does such a good job of exploring.
He does.
Former athletes, retired athletes, masculinity, past one's prime.
Yeah, and Don DeLillo's has a football novel. End Zone.
Yeah.
A very, very early
I haven't read
novel. Yeah, it's early Don DeLillo. It would be interesting to read it in conjunction with his baseball. The kind of myth of all of that. There were great baseball books for kids. There's a wonderful series by a man named Dwayne Decker, and he made up a baseball team, the Blue Sox, and he wrote at least 9 novels, but for teens, which for a book for each position.
Oh, cool!
So you have to try.
They're
long out of print, but you can easily get them.
Blue Sox.
The Blue Sox. So there's like The Catcher from Double-A about Pete Gibbs, and then there's Good Field, No Hit, and then there's Long Ball, the long ball to left field or something. One of those. The first baseman is Stretch Stuckey. See, I just remember all of these.
You remember this book.
They imprinted themselves on me. But they're not writing those kinds of books anymore. I mean, I wonder what it says about American culture, as you said, that has divorced literary writing from sports in a way.
Yeah, I think this isn't quite answering your question, but one thing I've noticed, I did a ton of research for this book. There are glimmers of autobiography in the fact that there's a lot of architecture, and I used to work for the American Institute of Architects, that there's a jazz musician, and I used to be a baritone saxophone player. Like, there's glimmers of me in a lot of these different characters, but it's mostly world building away and outside from myself. And I think so much of autofiction and its impression on not just American letters, but contemporary literature has pushed people away from imagining those different worlds. And so if we're relying on autofiction, we're relying on athletes to then go write those books, and
Right.
they're busy.
And they make a lot more money from
Right,
their
doing
sport
something
than writing a
else.
book. Right. Well, that your mention of autofiction, sort of writing autobiographical novels, or to sort of give it a facile description, made me think about, or I've been thinking about, that our kind of thinking about literary fiction has, there's your book, which is chapters that are interrelated. My novel, George and Lizzie, is just like snapshots of these characters in over a period of time. And Jenny Offal's Weather, all of those kind of, that they're not, I couldn't imagine writing a novel that begins with chapter 1 and ends with chapter 18. And I wonder what that says. I mean, you're in a particularly advantageous position to answer that, because you're the editor of the Paris Review and you're seeing submissions. And so what are you seeing about?
I think the novel is doing well. You pointed out 3 great examples of books that are more fractured, and I think part of that is our attention span, certainly, and the way people are, as readers but also as writers, just feeling a bit more divided, having a more fragmentary view of the world. I think part of it's that. But I think the novel is alive and well. I was reading a lot of books, and I mean, I'm always reading a lot of books, but I was thinking about narrative structure and, sort of the cliffhanger of a lot of novel structure, where if you're going from chapter 1 to chapter 20, sort of something exciting's happening, chapter end.
Yeah.
You have to turn the page. That felt kind of disingenuous, or not that exciting to me. I didn't want to rely on that emotional trigger.
Or manipulation,
It
kind
felt,
of.
yeah. And being a story writer and a story editor and editing a magazine that is, this year we just won the National Magazine Award for Fiction to celebrate the short fiction form in magazines, which is really exciting. But understanding story structure, thinking about the story form, wanting to celebrate and embrace that is something I think about literally every day.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And I started the Cactus League as stories, and thinking about that arc and the possibilities of that smaller space. And when I realized I really wanted to be an ensemble novel and build out a world and a timeline and a narrative that spanned the whole book, I didn't want to lose that smaller structure. And lucky for me that baseball innings to the baseball game, it fit very elegantly.
It did.
And that was very exciting for me as a writer. So my reasons to be fragmentary are a bit different, but I think it has a lot to do with sort of the way we think now.
Do you regret that? I mean, that Trollope would, Dickens. I mean, I don't have an answer for that. I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, I certainly see that my attention span.
I mean, I would like us all to be more patient.
Yeah.
But I think if this is the way we see the world right now, we should express it that way. And hopefully, I mean, even if it's a fragmentary novel, to read a novel, you have to slow down.
Right.
And I think, and that's okay.
Yeah. When you were working with the manuscript of the Cactus League, did you have questions about the arrangement of the chapters?
Oh,
how did you?
And years.
Yeah, how did you do that? Yeah.
I moved them around, I knew Jason was going to be the protagonist, and I had one friend read it who said, he needs to be in chapter 1.
Yeah,
and chapter 1, the protagonist is a retiring batting coach. And I said, no, I really want to start it with someone who's been around Arizona, who comes to the Cactus League every year, who has expectations and can sort of set the tone and the tenor for everything that will unfold. But I tried many things on in that first chapter, and I had, because there is sort of the winnowing of the squad, from those 80 guys down towards 25, and that happens every Thursday. I had to think really hard about where, for the athletes, where would be the most critical moment for them on that timeline. There's, a guy who should have gotten cut early in the season, but he keeps hanging on.
Right.
And so I thought, all right, he needs to go near the end of the book. So I tried on several different orders. And again, I feel really lucky that it sort of clicked together as it did.
Are you extraordinarily self-critical of your writing? And how does being an editor play into that?
Yeah, I would edit something into the ground if I could. I mean, not into the ground, but
right.
Being an editor, I was the co-editor of the Southern Review for 5 years, and then I've been at the Paris Review for almost 2 years. So the whole time I've been writing this book, I've been editing a magazine and thinking about other people's work all day long. After the first year or so at the Southern Review, I was able to segment, think about, this is everyone else's work, I'm gonna give that my full attention, and then I'm gonna close the door, walk into the other room, and here's my writing. And being able to silo the work that way was really helpful. But because I often don't get to my own manuscript until the weekend, or sometimes, let's be honest, a week or two will pass, there's an objectivity there. It's not like, of course my book is like my best friend, right? But
your baby.
My baby. But because I haven't been in it so close to it for several days, it feels fresh. I have fresh eyes. I have a bit of objective distance, right. And I think that makes me a much better reviser of my own work.
I know when I talk to a lot of writers, they say when they're working on, say, a mystery, for example, they don't read other mysteries, or they don't read fiction at all because they don't want those other voices to get into their heads.
The opposite is true for me, right? I'm reading peer
right.
work all the time, and that gives me a bit of the occasional crisis of working on someone's work who's so much of a better writer than I am. That is humbling and kind of scary. But it also really lit the fire for me. I was, in the summer of 2018, right after I sold the book and was embarking on sort of the last big edit, I was reading Deborah Eisenberg's collected stories, and I thought, man, I really missed the mark on my dialogue. I'm not going to figure out how to write like Debbie Eisenberg in one summer, but I can do better with this. And so, I spent several weeks just thinking about every exchange in the book.
Right.
And really kicking up the language there.
What other short stories? I know before this book, before your novel came out, you published a collection of short stories.
Yeah, a little collection. It's like a novella-length collection. Yeah.
Right. Called Scrubs. What are you? Do you think more comfortably in a short story format? Is that where you feel like you are at this point, at least?
Scrub was 4 stories that I wrote while in residency, actually at Jack Kerouac's house in Orlando, Florida, which was a trip and a lot of fun. At that point, that was, how I thought was in that short form, and they felt resonant with one another, and I said, here's a collection,
Right.
Building out the Cactus League, I wanted to really get to know the story form and think about the arc and the possibilities of the long short story. Alice Munro being a favorite, and then I wanted to do something more ambitious in terms of thinking about the narrative structure of a novel. And so to answer your question, yes and yes. I think, I feel most comfortable now as a story writer, but I don't want to be necessarily where I'm comfortable. So I'm working on new stories, but I think pushing myself into a more ambitious form, whether that means bigger and stranger and more ambitious short fiction, or if it means really scratching my head around the novel again until I figure it out. I'm not sure.
There is a wonderful novel in which baseball is not the central point, but part of the plot, called Things Invisible to See by Nancy Willard.
Oh, yeah.
And you know, she won the Newbery Award for a picture book, a children's book that she did. But this is one of her adult novels. And to me, I just reread it recently after I read The Cactus League, because it's so character driven, and it's the kind of book like yours where you know that the characters, each of the characters had a life before you meet them on the page, and that they'll have a life after you finish the book. And so to me, that's what a good work of fiction is, that it brings those people to life. But I think you would like that book.
Yeah, I haven't read it, but
it's old now.
Yeah, I'll track it down.
But track it down, because it's set in Ann Arbor, where I went to school, so I have a warmth for that on that basis, of course. So you mentioned Alice Munro and Deborah Eisenberg, two great short story writers. Who else?
George Saunders. I don't think I'm that funny of a writer, but I love his levity and his curiosity and the big-heartedness of his writing. This isn't a novelist, but Studs Terkel has been very important to me. I did quite a bit of oral history in my 20s, and I think, thinking about writing a realist book and an empathetic one that's really about the kinds of work people do and why they do it. I can point directly back to Studs for that.
So Lori Moore is somebody who I always think about.
Yeah, she's great.
Yeah.
I feel like I've sort of been meting out my Lori Moore stories. I need to do a real deep dive, but she's wonderful. Adam Johnson's story collection. If you hadn't noticed, I'm sort of circling in on these very long world building stories.
Right.
Is a sweet spot for me.
So when I think about world building, I think about historical fiction or science fiction and fantasy. Are you readers of? Have you ever been?
No. For me, actually, when I think of world building, I think of John McPhee. I think of long form reported narrative where, some of his books could be novels, they could be stories.
Right.
He has done such beautiful character sketches that also talk about a social issue.
Right, like coming into the country.
Yeah.
The whole,
Yeah, and I was reading his early profile of Bill Bradley.
Yes.
When I was thinking about sports writing, but also reading about the control of nature and sort of man and their impact on the landscape and on the natural environment. Thinking about living in Louisiana, thinking about his writing down there, but then also in the Southwest.
Right. Do you think of ever doing nonfiction, the same kind of John McPhee-ish kind of?
I would love to. I think I'm kind of shy in terms of the reportage and really sticking my neck out there and getting on the raft. He had that great boat ride down the river. I forget which river it is, but you know which one I'm talking about.
Yes.
He got on a few boats because he was also on the Mississippi. So, if I feel shy about it, probably means I should try, right? I was reading a lot before I became the editor of the Paris Review, before I had any idea I would have, this incredible opportunity to lead the magazine. I was reading George Plimpton's participatory journalism about sports. He tried to be the backup quarterback for the Detroit Lions, and
Paper Lions, right.
Failed miserably, admirably, wrote this really wonderful book about what it felt like to be a part of that team. So I think maybe there's nonfiction in my future, but I sure do like cracking a story.
What is, so kind of summarize for us from your unique perspective of being so good at, kind of a disparate group of things in a way. What's the future of literature in this society that we're living in right now?
Oh, that's such a hard question.
I know, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
The future, I mean, I think that, to your point earlier, I think that as a community, as a culture, we need to make sure that our impatience doesn't get the better of us. I think that making time to read literature, even in a politically fraught moment, even when there's something you need to be doing more immediately, that will be necessary. I think it is necessary. I think our lives are enriched for it. And, you know, the work that the two of us both do is making sure that literature holds a place.
Continues to be.
Continues.
Yeah. So do you have any predictions for the upcoming Major League Baseball season?
No, I mean, the Mariners are, I'm still a Mariners fan. I've not lived in Seattle for 20 years, and I hang on. It's a very young team, so I don't have great hopes for, you know, the win-loss column, but it'll be fun to get to know these new athletes. I think it'll be hard and not very fun to watch sort of what happens in the fallout of the Astros, but I
was
think,
just going to say that.
I think that that baseball will be better for the outcome, however uncomfortable it is.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that it was enough of an outcome?
I think there's more to come.
Do you?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what, but I mean, spring training baseball games just started 3 days ago or so, and the regular season starts in about 5 weeks, and we'll see.
Yeah, there's a lot of anger.
Yeah, you know,
about that.
I lived in Baton Rouge, so we would drive and see the Astros, and they're a really great group of athletes in terms of that team would have won a lot of games.
Yeah.
Without sign
cheating.
Yeah, without sign stealing.
Yeah.
So that's, as a fan, that's hard to watch.
Yeah. Well, Emily, thank you again for being
it's my
here.
Pleasure.
And it's just been so much fun for me to talk about short stories and writing and baseball and football and all of that kind of stuff.
All the balls.
All the balls, right. And it was a ball to spend time with you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.